All right, everybody. Y'all. We are coming now to Andy's next adventure as the man who started the People in the Press and who made the Pew Research Center what it is today, along with many of you other talented people who are represented here tonight. But here to tell us about all of that piece of this adventure is Scott Keeter, Director of Survey Research and the Chief Survey Methodologist for the Pew Center. Scott, yay, Scott. Well, he's coming up here, but Scott is one of those. He came to our field from academia as opposed to our previous friend from journalism and others who came from elsewhere. He's written a ton of great stuff that we all use. He, along with Andy and others, tries to keep us in line on cell phones. Many books illuminating what the public thinks and how to find out truly what the public thinks. Scott has prepared he prepared the nomination. He submitted the nomination to the committee that I chaired that selected Andy Kohut for the Mitofsky Award. It was really an easy job. We took just a few minutes actually to look at the things and said, this is hands down, there's no question, but Andy Kohut should get this award. And what Scott prepared was pure poetry, so please welcome Scott Keeter.
Thank you, Nancy, and I'm really honored to be here to say a few words about Andy. I'd like to tell you three things about him, and I'll be brief. The first thing is that Andy respects the public. Like all of us, Andy built his career on the generosity of strangers, the people who talk to us, give us their time when we ask them for their opinions and experiences. And the important thing is, I've never heard him say a disparaging thing about the public. Occasionally about politicians, yes, but never about the public. He repeatedly said to us that the public is not stupid. They make good judgments, and we are their voices, and that's why our profession is important. Joe Pew Jr., who founded the Pew Charitable Trust with his siblings, was asked by Look magazine in 1946 to offer advice to President Harry Truman. He said, "Tell the truth and trust the people." Andy's been doing that for his entire career. The second thing about Andy is that he's a builder. Most people know him as an incisive analyst of public opinion, describing and analyzing public opinion on the NewsHour or NPR. He is greeted at bed and breakfasts around the country by the proprietors who recognize him from the NewsHour and say, "Well, we had Brad Pitt here, but I'm really excited because we have Andy Kohut here." That's a true story. I'm not making that up. If you wondered where you'd find his fingerprints in the New York Times today, you'd think it'd be something about the election. But in fact, the New York Times today has two stories about two very different research projects at the center, both of which Andy was instrumental in creating. One story is about a Pew Internet study of American attitudes and behaviors related to online privacy. Andy started the whole line of research on the Internet back in about 1994. And led the creation of the Internet Project more than a decade ago. And today it had a wonderful report that it put out and was covered very widely. The other study is a massive survey of religion in Latin America produced by the Global Attitudes Project, which Andy founded, and the Religion in Public Life Project, which he helped to midwife into existence. The model that he created for politics at the Times Mirror Center in the 1980s is now applied here at the Pew Research Center to a diverse array of topics of great public importance, and that's his footprint and his wonderful legacy. The third thing about Andy is that he is a wonderful mentor. People who only know his sometimes gruff, all-business side may wonder about that, but those of us who've worked for him and with him understand it. I cannot tell you how many times Andy would walk into my office with something that I'd written in his hand and say, "I have a real problem with this." You too? Yeah. You know, you think, okay, maybe this is a good time to start looking for another job. But then, instead of just tossing it on the desk and walking out, he sits down and he says, let's work through it. He says, you're burying the lead. You're confusing the hell out of people with this. Out go a few words, you flip the bottom up to the top, you clarify this or that, and bingo, it makes a lot more sense. He did this with every one of his colleagues, from the most senior to the newest person on the staff. It's no exaggeration to say that I learned something valuable from him every day that I worked with him. I'd like to make one final point about Andy. He rode his data very hard to tell the best possible story in it. This sometimes created conflicts with the fact checkers, or those of us whose instinctive take is on the one hand, on the other hand. That's not the way Andy comes to data. Fairly heated arguments sometimes broke out over claims that he put at the top of a report. But the worst thing that you could do when working for Andy Kohut was not to fight him over something that you were convinced was wrong or couldn't be supported. The worst chewing out I ever got was when I didn't fight him on something that got into a report and Dan Balls called up and said, Andy, this doesn't square completely. And then he came into my office and said, you let me say that. You shouldn't have done that. I tried. He says, you didn't try hard enough. But you know, the reason that's true is that Andy is very unlike a lot of people at his level. He didn't want to win the argument. He wanted to be right. And there's a big difference there. He didn't want to prevail in battles with people or whatever. He wanted to tell the truth. And if you could help him get it right, he would gladly admit to you that he was wrong. Sometimes it would take a little time for him to come back to your office and say, I've been thinking about that. I think you got a point there, and let's see if we can fix that. But that sums up the Andy Kohut that I know. That takes a big man to be that kind of person, and that's the guy that we're honoring tonight. Andy.
Well, we've had a great run of speeches here. This has been tremendous. I have the privilege of presenting Andrew Kohut with the Warren Mitofsky Award. Now, we have the award consists of a citation, this big, for a big man, and there's a lot of text here. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's just too long, but I just want to read the key parts. Over his remarkable career in public opinion research, Andy Kohut has made a profound contribution to the understanding of politics and public affairs, both in the United States and globally. His scrupulously nonpartisan and unbiased approach has made him the trusted source for the American public, journalists, and policymakers seeking to understand public opinion. And the citation goes on to talk about things we've already heard about. Toward the end, throughout Andy's career, he has maintained a strong partnership with the Roper Center, archiving the data his organizations collect, and by regularly incorporating data from the Roper archive in his own analysis and reporting. And I'll just add, and appropriately attributing it to the Roper Center archive, which isn't always done by those many people who use our data. Andy brings honor to our field, given the spirit and passion that Warren Mitofsky, the father of the exit poll and former chair of the Center's board, held for the highest research standards. We are confident Warren would applaud this year's selection of Andrew Kohut for the 2014 Mitofsky Award. And I can attest to that, as can other board members as well. I'm delighted to present this award to Andrew Kohut.
It's really hard to know what to say following all of this. I mean, I'm just so overwhelmed by what's been said here. Obviously, much of it's true. I got to qualify everything. What an honor to receive this award and to be discussed as I've been discussed over this period of time. And one of the special things about it for me is that it's given in the name of my dear friend Warren Mitofsky. Warren and I shared a lot of things. First, of course, irascibility. At least that's how our friends described it. Other people used other words. Second, public opinion polling wasn't just what we did. It was a large part of who we were. I probably spent 10 winters, parts of winters at St. Bart's every year with Warren, and we could never really let the work go, and it was never a complete vacation because Warren and I were always at work, sort of. The other thing I learned about Warren and myself at St. Bart's is that we're both really good cooks. And I think there's some parallels between polling and cooking. As with polling, there's more than one way to make the same dish. But in the end, there are principles in both practices that ultimately separate the good from the bad. I'll speak more about that a little bit later. I was lucky enough not only to learn these principles in my methods courses in graduate school and undergraduate school, but more comprehensively at the hand of one of the great pollsters in our history. Many of you probably don't know his name. Paul K. Perry, the longtime president and chief methodologist of the Gallup organization, was my mentor. Paul took over the Gallup methodology after the 1948 debacle, and he changed the way Gallup did public election polling or public opinion polling more generally. And Gallup was right on the money for the next 30 plus years, given Paul's approach. Paul was not only a master of sampling, survey design, but he was a great student of question wording, and many of the questions that are the discourse of polling these days are Gallup questions that were created under his tenure, either by him or at least improved by him. How lucky I was to have a mentor like Paul K. Perry, one of the people who really did so much not only for me, but this whole profession. A second great influence was Don Kellerman of Times Mirror, who allowed me to realize my dream. While I had worked in polling for many years, my dream was to be able to do in-depth polling on the issues that I saw as important, rather than polling that addressed the interests and often the assumptions of my clients, news editors or funders who had specific ideas about things. We defined our own research agenda, which was a broad one, from media to politics to international polling initially, and then the other subjects would come along. Our job was to report in-depth, comprehensive surveys in ways that was understandable not only to the public and policymakers as well. And we often had an impact because either we covered new ground in those days or are more comprehensive than polling was 25 years ago. I was very fortunate to get media coverage, no small thanks to how much I learned from Don about how to get the story out and what the story was, whether it was developing a political typology, establishing a values base, polling extensively in the Soviet Empire as communism was collapsing, and conducting, as someone mentioned earlier, the first surveys about the internet, I think in 1994 and 1995, and then trending all of that and chronicling the subsequent revolution in news and information that were to follow. I owe my success to the research principles that I learned from Paul K. Perry. And all those years of what Don Kellerman taught me about how to make sure that the story got out in a way that would have impact and really told what the survey found. And of course, all this was possible to achieve because I remember something that Daniel Yankelovich once said at APOR. He said the first step in the creative process was getting the money. And that was so darn important to what we did. Well, Times Mirror was our first source in the creation of the center. Pew took over in 1996 and gave us the resources to do what we did. And the independence, which has been so important to what we do. Over the course of my career, this field has expanded from the late 1960s, early 1970s, from Gallup, Roper, and Lou Harris, in a way that was unthinkable then. There are so many more practitioners, and basically that's a good thing because different measures on the same topics provide greater insight into attitudes. But I have to say a lot of the polling these days has little depth, just horse race or bottom line. And getting back to my cooking analogy, some of it I see as the equivalent of fast food, if not junk food. However, the bigger problem is the extent to which the low completion rates have increasingly led to judgmental approaches rather than principles of probability design. Weighting by party affiliation as if it were strictly an independent variable is probably the most common of these. It's really extraordinary for me to look at. These are not easy times for our field, and I guess I was lucky to have spent most of my time where things were not so difficult. And I was finally lucky in another very important way, and that is to have a partner in crime in Diane Colasanto. Diane was first my chief methodologist at Gallup in those tumultuous years following the death of Dr. Gallup, and then my partner in the development of PSRA. I never met anyone whose judgment I trusted more professionally than Diane. The only thing I have always questioned is the personal choices she's made. I want to thank you all very much for the kind words and for this award. Thank you.
that's a truly tough act to follow, and I'm not going to say any more other than thank everyone again for attending tonight. Feel free to mingle, hang around further. I want to thank you all on behalf of the Roper Center Board and the Roper Center. Thank you all.